women. I stand surrounded by the voices of these women. Lebo Mashile, Siphokazi Jonas, Natalia Mulebati, Mamzi Namhlope, Diana Ferris, Mbali Malime. In the laps of these women, our grandmothers, our mothers, our sisters, and our nannies, we have learned to find our voices, to speak, to sing, and to make poetry. Poetry that forms and shapes and define our identities. Our women are resilient. Their voices echo in different textures of pain, joy, hope, courage, and ubuntu. The spirit of I am because you are. And here we are again, 17 months after the national lockdown. COVID-19 may have kept us away from these women, but not their poetry and not their resilience. It is the poetry of our grandmothers, mothers, sisters, aunties, and nannies that has held us through this dark past 2 years. I am born of these women. I am Siphindile Hlongwa, Kamamdunge Mkhathini, Ngubonduna, Okantulo kaBhodide. I am the curator of the Poetry Africa Festival, presented by the Center for Creative Arts at the University of KwaZulu-Natal. I come to you from the beautiful Phansi Museum in eThekwini. Phansi Museum yindawo egcwele impilo. Minyaka yonke ngesikhathi sePoetry Africa Festival, le ndawo inanela amazwi ezimbongi zethu kanye namakhulukhulu ezingane zesikole ezimenywa ubuciko kulesi sikhungo samagugu. I-COVID-19 kungenzeka ukuba ivale ama-theatre, amagalari, amahholo omculo nama-museum. Kepha ayizange iqede amazwi ezimbongi zethu. Ugqozu, imicabango namazwi ezimbongi zethu kwenze ukuba iPoetry Africa Festival yeminyaka engama-25 ibuye uzovusa iPhansi Museum, ikhulule emaketangeni okhuvethe ukuze ikhangise ngamagugu ayo amahle ezethamilini zethu. IPoetry Africa yanyakenye ebineminyaka engama-24 yethulwe online lapho amazwi ezimbongi aqhubeka nokusipha ukukhanya nenduduzo. iPoetry Africa eneminyaka engama-25 kulo nyaka ayiphephile ngokuphelele engozini ye-COVID-19. Kepha ilokhu igqugquzela ngamazwi ezimbongi zethu njengoba ukugonyelwa kwe-COVID-19 kuya ngokuya kusibuyisela ekukhanyeni. I-Poetry Africa eneminyaka engama-25 kulo nyaka iyingqophamlando. Isinikeza ithuba ebalulekile lokuba sizindle siphinde sigubhe ifa le-festival. Kepha futhi isivumela ukuba sidlinze ngokujulile ngomphakathi wethu kanye nenhlangano yokuguqula ezenhlalo. Izinkondlo ziyasiza ukuba sikhulule amaphimbo ethu sizwakale. I-Poetry Africa Festival eyethulwa yi-Center for Creative Arts isekelwe yiNyuvesi yaKwaZulu-Natal iminyaka engama-25.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the 25th anniversary of the Poetry Africa Festival. My name is Nobuhle Hlongwa. I am the Dean and the Head of the School of Arts at the University of KwaZulu-Natal. We are very proud as the School of Arts for this celebration and for this festival that is coming at this time as we fight COVID-19 in our country. We are happy by the opportunity that has been presented by the National Humanities Institute that has granted the Center for Creative Art a catalytic research grant to support this festival this year, as well as some of the works that you will see during the course of the week. I would like to indicate that as a School of Art, we are very proud of the young staff members in drama and performing arts, as well as in African languages, who have come together to work with the Center for Creative Arts as part and parcel of the catalytic research grant from NIHSS. Some of the works you will see. As the University of KwaZulu-Natal and as a School of Arts and the College of Humanities, the work that they have produced is bringing honor to the university in terms of the publications and also in terms of the wider community engagement as we engage with our artists. I would like to take this opportunity to thank our head of the College of Humanities, Professor Nhlanhla Mkhize, for his leadership. I also want to thank the director of the Humanities Institute at UKZN, Professor Johannes Smith. I would also want to thank the leadership of the director for CCA, Dr. Ismail Mohammed, the curator of the Poetry Africa Festival, Mrs. Pindile Hlongwa, the team members in the Center for Creative Arts, Valma, Yenzi, Sakile. I want to acknowledge and thank all our partners and our funders, especially the NIHSS, as well as the Department of Arts and Culture, for us to celebrate these 25 years in style. To our poets out there, please continue to be agents of transformation. I thank you very much. Go and inspire greatness.
The director of the Center for the Creative Arts, Dr. Ismail Mohammed, the executive of the University of KwaZulu-Natal, and the entire community of KwaZulu-Natal, our surrounding communities, and our continental and international participating audiences, and most importantly, the poets and artists, without whose creative genius we would not be gathered here to celebrate this event. It is my singular honor to invite you to partake in the 25th edition of the Center for the Creative Arts Poetry Africa Festival. This is one of the 4 annual festivals that are hosted by the Center for the Creative Arts. The other 3 being the Durban International Film Festival, the Time of the Writer Festival, and the Jomba Contemporary Dance Festival. The theme for this year's Poetry Africa Festival is, I quote, unmuted, power to the poet, unquote. This theme reflects on the role that the creative and performing arts have played and continue to play in the struggle against all forms of oppression and injustices, in the furtherance of democracy and the total emancipation of humankind. A brief reflection on the role that the bard or imbongi in ancient and contemporary African society, as well as the praise singers, poets, and prophets in the courts of the kings in biblical times, illustrate the above point. Not only is the imbongi or poet a living library or historian of his or her people, they are also public intellectuals who speak truth to power without fear or favor. It is this poetic license, the unfettered freedom of expression, that enabled them to balance the scales of power or justice between the kings and their communities. This is a vindication of the African maxim, Inkosi inkosi ngabantu, Khosi ki khosi kabantu, literally meaning the king is a king because of the people. This maxim points towards the mutual interdependence between the king, the governor or ruler, the ministers and government officials, and anyone who holds an influential leadership position on the one hand, and the people or community on the other hand, who have entrusted them with the responsibility to govern or lead. We see this influential role of the bard or imbongi in the courts of great kings, such as King Sikiti Kasensangakhona, known as King Shaka Zulu, as well as in the courts of powerful kings in the biblical narrative, such as King David, in the form of the bards or prophets who sanctioned his behavior from time to time. South Africa and the world at large are facing many challenges, most of which have to do with ethics, governance, and our relationship to each other and the natural environment. In the face of all these challenges and social ills, it is about the time that the poets are unmuted. Unmuting or unsilencing the poets enables them to exercise their creative genius without fear or favor in the interest of good governance, democracy, social, economic, cognitive, health, and other forms of justice. In Africa, there is no poetry without audience participation. With these background words, I invite you again to take part in the 25th edition of the Center for the Creative Arts Poetry Africa Festival. I wish to conclude by expressing our sincerest appreciation to our sponsors and partners who have always walked this journey with us, and without whose support we would perhaps not be here today. In no particular order, our sincerest appreciation goes to the following: the KwaZulu-Natal Department of Arts and Culture, the French Institute of South Africa, the National Institute for the Humanities and Social Sciences, Total Energies, the University of KwaZulu-Natal, the poets and creative artists, and previous, current, and future audiences without whose active participation our events are devoid of meaning. I also wish to thank our organizing and logistics team under the leadership of Dr. Ismail Mohammed, who have done a splendid job as usual. Do enjoy the event. I thank you. Giyabonga.
When I was young, my grandmother taught me this. is the greatest gesture to say thank you. So ladies and gentlemen, if you hear the chimes, rub your hands together and for thank you, amaku, namaste, whichever phrase applies to your culture. This year's edition of the Poetry Africa Festival salutes and honors all the poets who have walked this road with us and who, over the 25 years, have given us the words to express our feelings, to share our experiences, and to address issues of poverty, social injustice, struggles, and survival. This year's festival recognizes the power of the poets. Behind their masks, the voices of our poets have continued to remain unmuted.
In a 2005 summer issue of Speak Easy magazine, the figurehead of the spoken word poetry movement, Saul Williams, declared, and I quote, "Either the academics can turn up their noses at it, or they can realize it now. This modern day spoken word movement will evolve literature," unquote. At the time of Williams's comment, he was a high school teacher in South Los Angeles, and he was bearing witness to the impact of hip-hop culture and rap music on his students. Recognizing the cultural similarities of spoken word poetry to hip-hop and rap, he believed in the potential impact of political poetry as a teaching tool. Now, over the last 2 years, the COVID-19 pandemic has disrupted the schooling system, and we have had to find creative ways to continue to keep young people engaged. At the Poetry Africa Festival, presented by the Center for Creative Arts at the University of KwaZulu-Natal, we have been overwhelmed by the enthusiastic response from young people to our public participation program. Developing original poetry in their own unique styles, young people have expressed much about their hopes, their fears, concerns, and aspirations for our young South African democracy. Many of the people who have participated in our public programs are of a born-free generation. Their hopes and aspirations are fueled less by the nostalgia of our history, but rather more by the greatness of our constitutional values. The Poetry Africa Festival, like all festivals presented by the Center for Creative Arts, anchors itself on the values of social justice. We are delighted to offer young people a platform alongside legendary poets. We hope that the crossover of ideas and rhythms and their voices will be the threads by which we weave a better nation. As a festival located in the School of the Arts, we are proud to bridge the divide between what is generally considered as academic poetry and new forms of creative expression that breaks all conventional rules. We are grateful to the leadership of the University of KwaZulu-Natal, the Dean of the School of the Arts, Professor Nobuhle Hlongwa, and the Deputy Vice-Chancellor of the College of Humanities, Professor Nhlanhla Mkhize, for their passionate support of our work. We are thankful to the National Institute for Humanities and Social Sciences for a generous grant that has enabled us to bring spoken word poetry to the center of the Academy. We are also grateful to the Institute for acknowledging Poetry Africa Festival as a nominee for the NIHSS Creative Collections Award. We're indeed grateful to our loyal sponsor, the KwaZulu-Natal Department of Sports, Arts and Culture, for holding our hands for more than 2 decades and for recognizing the festival as both an enabler of expression and as a contributor to the cultural economy of our province. This year's Poetry Africa Festival is supported most generously by the French Institute of South Africa and Total Energies. It is with their contribution that we can proudly present and create work for more than 80 poets from 25 countries across the globe. At a time when COVID-19 has almost devastated artists' mobility across borders, the support of the French Institute of South Africa and Total Energies has enabled us to bring the world to South Africa and take South Africa to the world through the online space. At the heart of our online festival are the poets and their audiences, the media who report about them, and the various role players who make up a festival program. I borrow from my colleague Siphokazi as I pay homage to everyone that has been associated with the Poetry Africa Festival over the past 25 years, and will continue to walk this journey with us to a place where poetry can heal us, it can offer us hope, it helps us to build and envision a better world, and a place where social justice and freedom can reign, a place where democracy can be unmuted, and where power can rest in the voice of the poet. I thank you.
As Center for Creative Arts, sibamba ngazo zombili kubalingani bethu kanye nabaxhasi bethu ngokwezimali. Bayakwazi ukubaluleka kwamandla ezinkondlo futhi basiseka ngothando nangombono. I-Embassy yase-France kanye ne-French Institute of South Africa sebehambe izindlela eziningi kanye nathi kule minyaka edlule. Kulo nyaka, i-Poetry Africa Festival iyaziqhenya ngokuthi iphinde futhi yesekwe yi-Embassy yase-France kanye ne-French Institute of South Africa. Ake sizwe ngabo ukuthi kungani baqhubeka nokusekela i-Poetry Africa Festival.
Dear ladies and gentlemen, dear poetry lovers, bonjour. It really gives me a profound pleasure today to open this 25th edition of the Poetry Africa International Festival. As you all know, this is a very special event, as the festival celebrates a whole quarter of a century of existence. This really is an achievement, and yet further evidence of the love of the people of this country for words. Ever since I came here 2 years ago, I have been struck by this enthusiasm for words and writing, for speech and songs, for the most ancient sayings, and for contemporary slogans. I fully understand this love, and we share it too. Today, it is an event that is important to me, not just as the ambassador of France to South Africa, but as a fervent book lover. I know that all of you here also share the same passion for books and words. Why is it important to us, this connection through words? And why is it so especially powerful and intense with poetry? Perhaps it is because poetry does not just tell us stories, it opens a dialogue. This is why the theme of this festival's anniversary edition, Unmuted, the Power of the Poet, seems so important to me. It honors poets who open up difficult conversations and use their voices to fight for equality. I would like to thank the Center for Creative Arts at the University of KwaZulu-Natal for organizing this incredible festival every year for so long, and especially Professor Dr Nyanzi, Deputy Vice-Chancellor of the College of Humanities, and Professor Nobutle Tlongwa, Dean of the School of the Arts, Dr. Ismail Mohammed, Director of the Center for Creative Arts, and Mrs. Sipindile Tlongwa, Curator of the Poetry Africa Festival. Many others have contributed, and we are deeply grateful for their efforts. Finally, I would also like to thank warmly our generous partner, Total, which supports more than 40 poets from 25 countries around the world who are presented at the Poetry Africa Festival this year. Its grant also allows Poetry Africa to present the annual Slam Poetry Festival. The French Embassy, IFAS, and Total together aim to encourage education through the arts and to bring the beauty and power of poetry to new audiences to discover. Thank you very much and enjoy the festival.
Dear ladies and gentlemen, dear poets and poetry lovers, bonsoir. On behalf of the French Institute of South Africa, I would like to thank all of you for attending this online opening of the Poetry Festival. This is the first time I have the honor and the pleasure of speaking at this occasion, as I just arrived in South Africa 1 month ago to take my new position as cultural attaché at the French Institute. I am already very impressed by the creativity, the energy and the talent of the artists and poets I had the chance to meet already. For many years, the French Institute of South Africa has been supporting all 4 of the Center for Creative Arts festivals: Time of the Writer, Jomba, Durban International Film Festival and Poetry Africa Festival. Our role is simple. We strive to bring the best of French and Francophone culture to South Africa and to promote South African artists on the international scene. But more than that, we work to create a true dialogue, a conversation between our 2 countries. I would like to warmly thank the Center for Creative Arts at the University of KwaZulu-Natal for organizing this amazing festival and for showcasing the work and the words of 40 poets from 25 countries across the globe. During these times of pandemic, many are unsure whom or what to believe. Of course, a poet can help us emotionally in these times of lockdowns and loneliness, expressing our innermost feelings better than we can ourselves. But poetry is also the search for the right word, the true word, le mot juste, as we say in French. During this time, the poet who seeks to tell the truth in the most direct way possible is more important than ever. With our partner, Total, we are proud to support these poets to share their words both nationally and internationally. Enjoy the festival. Merci beaucoup. Thanks a lot.
We remain indebted to the Embassy of France and the French Institute of South Africa for giving voice to our poets. This year, the French Institute of South Africa has assisted us by bringing on board our newest sponsor, Total Energies. Last year's 24th edition of the Poetry Africa Festival was presented entirely as a virtual festival. While the COVID-19 pandemic may have shut down our lives in many ways, it did not shut down our ability to create, to inspire, and to build a more humane society. The 24th edition of the Poetry Africa Festival was a shortlisted finalist for the Best Digital Creative Collections Award, presented by the National Institute for Humanities and Social Sciences. This year's edition of the Poetry Africa Festival is also generously sponsored by the National Institute for Humanities and Social Sciences.
Welcome to this year's Poetry Africa Festival. Titled Power to the Poet, this year's 25th edition of our annual Poetry Africa Festival features some of the most prominent as well as most verbal of poets, both locally and continentally. The exceptional team of the Center for Creative Arts at the University of KwaZulu-Natal, under the excellent leadership of its director, Dr. Ismail Mahomet, and Poetry Africa curator and project leader, Siphokazi Jonas, are once again curating and presenting an excellent array of poets and presenters that will not only give the poem center stage, but also show how poetry indeed speaks truth to power, and we may say has in fact been speaking truth to power on the African continent for some time, which constitutes a key contribution to the critical and constructive contribution of the African humanities to the societal development and well-being of the people of our continent. As part of the celebrations of our Forever Young annual event, we shall launch a documentary based on the archives of the Poetry Africa Festival, as well as the similarly titled anthology published by UKZN Press, and, amongst others, also a collection of writings about contemporary spoken word poetry published in partnerships with the Imbiza Journal for African Writing. Funded by the National Institute of the Human and Social Sciences as one of their catalytic projects, the latter was brought together under the leadership of Dr. Ismail Mohammed and is titled The Slam Poetry Movement in South Africa, Giving a Voice to the Oppressed and Agency to the Black Lives Matter, LGBTQ+, gender, sexuality, anti-racism and decolonization movements within the context of the Poetry Africa Festival at the University of KwaZulu-Natal. As an annual international festival, Poetry Africa provides a vital opportunity to reflect, celebrate and critically reflect on the role of poetry in the movement for social change, both nationally and internationally. The festival also presents an opportunity to both contribute to and showcase a sample of the academic scholarship at the university. It is a vibrant South African cultural platform and a contributor to the cultural economy of the broader eThekwini. The week-long program features engagements with poets through campus and school visits, poetry exchanges, book launches, open mic sessions, evening performances, and the ever-popular Slam Jam at venues across the city of Durban. The current generation of spoken word poetry, which is highly politicized and which draws upon racial, economic, and gender injustices, as well as the zeitgeist of the nation for subject matter, has been one of the more impactful programs through which the Center for Creative Arts has been able to engage with youth and social movements over the last 25 years. To note too is that the Poetry Africa Festival was earlier this year nominated for the NIHSS Award for the Best Digital Creative Collection. The award was won by the CCA's Jomba Dance Festival. We strongly recommend participation in the festival and may it continue to make its exceptional annual contribution to the education in our African humanities, not least our African digital humanities. Thank you.
Makwani, ngoxhaso lwezimali eyithole ku-National Institute for Humanities and Social Sciences, i-Center for Creative Arts ibe isibambisana ne-UKZN Press kanye ne-Imbiza Journal for African Writing ukushicilela iqoqo lezinkondlo neqoqo lemibhalo ebalulekile emayelana ne-Poetry Africa Festival, izimbongi nezinkondlo zazo. Manje sikhuluma nabanye ababengabahleli bamaqoqo.
And I'm one of the guest editors of the next issue of Imbiza, which is a collaboration with the Poetry Africa. And I think working on this project for me, I think the most important thing that I learned, and I think something that I want to share, is the amount of people that are really working on doing the work of our dreaming our world anew. And sometimes I feel like we can feel like we're in silos. We can feel like we are a sense of aloneness in doing the work of dreaming of a world anew, which means doing the work of acting on our dreams. And sometimes I can feel like a thing that is happening in small amounts. And I think being in part of this project, you just get to see the amount of of people who are invested in that and that energy, to know that is an exciting thing, but also to know that is an exciting energy that we all know that we have to feel more and know that it exists, and then hopefully in action that energy, to know that we are all in a way connecting or trying to connect, and having that be the vibration that carries us, to know that is happening should be the vibration that carries us.
Hi, my name is Ongezwa Mbele, and I'm one of the guest editors for Imbiza Journal, Poetry Africa Special Edition. It's been a wonderful experience to compile knowledge about poetry from writers within the southern of Africa. I've learned a lot. Thank you very much to the contributors in this journal for their vulnerability and for their words and for their thought-provoking engagement. For me, to work on this project has been beautiful, because also I was raised by the Poetry Africa Festival as an undergrad student at the University of KwaZulu-Natal, so I come full circle in doing this project. And thank you to my colleagues, Uspiwo Mahala, Ishmael, and Spindile Nomcebisi Moyuka, who've held my hand as we tried to actually work with alignment in words and in spirit. As Pindle has said, siyabonga kakhulu to the contributors, the people who made this festival possible in its 25 years of existing. So, Amaku, Osi, Makwande, and let the show begin.
Imbiza Journal for African Writing ingumlingani wezokusakaza ye-Center for Creative Arts. Le journal inikeza imicabango yemicimbi emibili ye-Center for Creative Arts, okuyi-Time of the Writer Festival ne-Poetry Africa Festival. I-Poetry Africa Festival ingumcimbi wezwekazi. I-Poetry Africa Festival yalonyaka wama-25 izokwethula izimbongi ezivela kuzo zonke izifundo zezwekazi i-Afrika, Southern Africa, i-Central Africa, i-Western Africa, i-Eastern Africa kanye ne-Northern Africa. I-Poetry Africa Festival ithi iqinisa ubu-Afrika ibe ixhumana nomhlaba wonke ngokuthola abalingani abenza umsebenzi wezezinkondlo e-Europe, e-Asia nase-America. I-Poetry Africa Festival yalonyaka yethula izimbongi ezivela emazweni angama-25. Africa Festival eminyakeni eminingi ixhaswe ngesandla esivulekile wezomnyango wezobuciko namasiko KwaZulu-Natal. Ngaphezu kwalokho, umnyango uxhasa i-Center for Creative Arts ukwethula i-Time of the Writer Festival, Durban International Film Festival kanye ne-Jomba Contemporary Dance Experience. I-Center for Creative Arts iyakwazisa ukusekelwa umnyango wezobuciko namasiko KwaZulu-Natal okuyiwo asize kakhulu iPoetry Africa ukuba iphakame ize ibe ngeminye yemicimbi yamasiko ebalulekile eAfrika yonkana.
Siphokazi Jonas is a writer, poet, performer, and a producer with a strong national footprint and growing international presence. She is a co-producer, co-writer, and performer on the short film adaptation of #We Are Dying Here that will be screened at this year's Poetry Africa Festival. In 2020, #We Are Dying Here was adapted into a poetry short film with Optical Films, in partnership with executive producer Sia Kolisi and Rachel Kolisi. The film debuted at the Pan-African Film Festival in Los Angeles and was nominated for Best Narrative Short. The film was mentioned in Time Out New York as one of the best productions to stream during the lockdown.
Earlier in February this year, Siphokazi Jonas was invited to the South African State of the Nation address, where she delivered a captivating poem prior to the presidential address. At the 25th edition of the Poetry Africa Festival, we are proud to announce Siphokazi Jonas as the festival featured poet to represent our theme, Unmute, Power to the Poets.
Thanks for the hashtag. But there's no time to tweet, even in parliament and court, where they're in the business of cooking laws to serve justice to the vulnerable. But first, a few questions to establish your innocence. Did you say no? Do your clothes say no? Your life? Your values, your virtues? How long have you lived as a no? Because what matters is not what you say, it's what he believes he heard. So thanks for the hashtag. But the trend is, we are dying here.
Thank you so much, Poetry Africa and the Center for the Creative Arts, for this incredible honor. It means so much to have been selected as the featured poet for this year's Poetry Africa, not only because of what this platform does for African poetry and the way in which it showcases poets across so many demographics, but also because it's an affirmation of the importance of following your voice. I'm grateful to the many collaborators whom I've worked with and will continue to work with, where we allow ourselves to play, to innovate, to explore, to be wrong, to find moments of magic through poetry, through theater, through film, all of the many mediums in which we work. I hope there's a young child somewhere, there's some older person who's on the verge of giving up on their dream, who's watching this and who's able to see themselves occupying spaces like these simply by following that internal GPS, that creative instinct that makes the slightest difference in the world. And I hope to see them here one day. Thank you.
Come on, poets, let's make it rain! Yes! The medium of film as a marriage with poetry will feature strongly at this year's 25th Poetry Africa Festival. Amongst our highlights is a collaboration between the celebrated Tribangi Dance Company and South African poets Malika Ndlovu, Xabiso Vili, Gubela and Sihle Ntuli. Ngonhlaba walonyaka, iCenter for Creative Arts yethule i-Affluent Human Rights Festival ebixhaswe i-Embassy yase-Netherlands. uDaniel Sheldon oyi-animator wawina umncintiswano i-Affluent Cartoon Competition. uDaniel Sheldon useke wasebenza nePoetry Africa documentary ecwaningwe yaphinde yahlelwa nguKaren Ijumba kanye neqembu lamaciko anobuchule. Le documentary ixhaswe ngabanye babaxhasi bethu, i-National Institute for Humanities and Social Sciences, i-French Institute of South Africa, kanye ne-Total Energies. Kanti izokwethulwa okokuqala kwi-Poetry Africa Festival kulo nyaka.
We are said to be living in and towards a post-racial society where words like Rainbow Nation and colorblind are frequently used to describe a supposed reconciliation of imagined and real racial difference. However, our lived reality presents a more complex truth.
Let's say you identify with being labeled black. You feel a certain sense of pride, of belonging when you write or say it. You form judgment against society based on the idea that society has formed judgments against you.
Black. Backward, brutes, behind, beggars, beyond blessed, blameful, boastful, but beautiful. Big black behind, big breast, begging by Bwandilo, big one, a black Benz, buys body, big bucks, big bills. Body beggars, business blossoms, but Bambo Bwana, Baba, Bwanji budgety.
Black bodies genuflect on sidewalks to a God that is all brimstone and fire. Their chorus, a hallelujah of bullets, a Red Sea deep enough for their mothers to swim in. They said he looked like a serial offender. There was too much Africa in his skin. Something about the way he walked screamed rape and pillage. The way he pulled that wallet quick out of his pocket, it might as well have been a bullet. Amadou Diallo, trigger warning.
Saying you can't breathe and dying, lounging in your house and shot by someone who mistook your house for their house and dying. It's a boy being shot whilst picking a sunflower and dying. It's fill that silence how you please and still die.
We tell their deaths like fairy tales. The way their skulls split across pavement. The way they cannot outrun a bullet. How can she say Jesus was a white man when he died the blackest way possible? With his hands up. With his mother watching.
I am the embodiment of my people. I'm a symbol of their strength and struggle. My feet freely raised from the North Star to the South Send. I fight back to the world of racial dust. Badi Mubaka have sent me to wipe the dirty floors of race, class, and poverty that my father left untouched. I am Steve Bantu Bigo's descendant. And I know it's not a sin to be born black.
The myth of South African exceptionalism is that the democratic state is somehow a miracle, a rainbow nation that leads to gold. But it isn't a rainbow that leads to gold. It's a damp and dingy mineshaft, hurtling away from safety and the surface.
As a country, most of us know that we're well out of any rainbow nation dream. But I think while the economic and the poverty and the unemployment figures are what they are, we need to have more open and honest conversations about race, the function of racial privilege, the histories that have created the racial privilege. And once we've had those or are starting those, we can have the conversations around how we remediate this.
So, for instance, I am reluctantly classified as colored, and I always am caught in the dilemma of whether to acknowledge that label which carries such painful apartheid memories for me, or to take up its longer history as a name for emancipated slaves, which is part of my own history. So how do I signal all of those things?
I think the real work that is done around race and transformation is done from a grassroots level, and that the government is reacting the whole time as opposed to interacting.
Coming from the UK, The Poetry Africa Festival will also present 3 poetry films by Deborah Watson. Her film, Every Day in Apocalypse, was awarded a Merit Award for Audience Impact at the Nature Without Borders International Film Festival. Unmute the power to the poets. Unmute, speak out against racism. Unmute to speak out against gender violence. Unmute to speak against patriarchy. Unmute to speak for social justice. Unmute to speak about courage. Unmute to speak of hope and aspiration. Unmute the power of a women poet.
Stella Nyanzi is a Ugandan human rights activist, poet, medical anthropologist, feminist, queer rights activist, and scholar of sexuality, family planning, and public health. She was arrested in 2017 for insulting the Ugandan president. After her arrest in 2017, she was suspended from Makerere University. She appealed the decision with Makerere University Appeal Tribunal, which directed that she be reinstated, promoted to the level of research fellow with immediate effect, and be paid back wages. The Makerere University refused to abide by its tribunal decision. Stella Nyanzi filed a lawsuit against the university, requesting reinstatement and back wages. In December 2018, the Makerere University dismissed her along with 45 other academics, arguing that her contract had expired. Stella Nyanzi is a woman of courage. It is her poems that flows in the blood of our veins. It is a voice which loudly proclaims, "Unmute, power to the poets." The Center for Creative Arts at the University of KwaZulu-Natal is proud to present Dr. Stella Nyanzi to deliver the keynote address at the 25th edition of the Poetry Africa Festival.
Happy silver anniversary to the Poetry Africa Festival. I thank the University of KwaZulu-Natal's Center for Creative Arts for inviting me to deliver this keynote speech entitled Democracy Unmuted, Power to the Poets. It is empowering to publicly talk about unmuting. For many years in my country, Uganda, I have struggled hard to unmute my poetic voice. Simply because of my poetic writings that are critical of Uganda's militant autocratic dictatorship under Yoweri Museveni, I variously faced political persecution, including being a political prisoner of conscience. I was arrested while dissenting and detained about 20 times in the last few years, 3 of these directly arising from my poetic writings. I was sentenced to 18 months in maximum security prison for writing a birthday poem criticizing the dictator with figurative comparisons between his mother's reproductive functions and government failings in the country. In my mid-40s, I suffered a miscarriage during torture by prison wardresses. For poetically criticizing the dictator's wife, who masquerades as Minister of Education, although she lacks the requisite education qualifications, I was unjustly subjected to repeated suspensions with half pay for 5 years from my prestigious permanent and pensionable position at Uganda's oldest public university called Makerere University. My name was put on the widely feared no-fly list, effectively slapping me with a travel ban. An entire squad of armed anti-terrorism soldiers once physically removed me from an outbound flight at Entebbe International Airport. During my first court trial for offending dictator Museveni, when I metaphorically likened him to just a pair of buttocks, the state prosecutors applied to the Chief Magistrate's Court to subject me to involuntary mental examination. The magistrate refused my lawyers to apply for bail. instead remanding me to Luzira Women's Prison for a month before hearing my constitutional right to apply for bail. On top of all this political persecution, criminalization, pathologization, and alienation staged as deterrents to further deploying poetry to harshly criticize the violence, violations, vices, and virulence of dictator Museveni, police severally raided my home, often confiscating computers. My children's private vehicle was often trailed as they traveled between school and home. My children went into self-protection homes at least 5 times. My bank accounts were frozen. I was once abducted from a private vehicle by masked gunmen and received several death threats via telephone, email, and social media. All this state-instigated intimidation was aimed at muting my poetic creativity that incessantly and crudely criticizes dictator Museveni's death blows to democracy, justice, freedom, equality, and peace in Uganda. Resisting the state machinery and mechanizations deployed to mute critical voices has thus become second nature to me. Within this national context of militant repression, corruption, lawlessness, misogyny, violent torture, closure of civic space, diminution of academic freedom, and muzzling of the public press, I am honing the skills of constantly unmuting myself as a poet, writer, thinker, activist, hacktivist, community organizer, opposition politician, and defiant dissident. If democracy is to thrive in Africa, then creative thinkers, writers, artists, and performers must be allowed freedom of expression. Poets must be unsilenced and muted, the gags torn, and the boots on our Adam's apples lifted. Unmuting critical creative voices is mandatory for democracy to thrive. My dissident role model who passed on earlier this year, the Egyptian revolutionary prolific writer Nawal El-Saadawi, asserted, democracy is an illusion. We cannot have democracy in a capitalist, imperialist, patriarchal religious system because what is democracy, she asked. Democracy is real freedom. If democracy is indeed real freedom, then for democracy to be attained, freedom of expression must be actualized. Any form of muting, silencing, erasure, invisibilizing, gagging, censoring, damping, and so on, which takes away or takes from the voice and voicing produced by critics is an attack on democracy. Muting does not only dilute or diminish or decrease the extent of democracy, but it threatens the very foundations of real freedom. The Bill of Rights of different African states provides constitutional right to freedom of expression, freedom of conscience, thought, press, speech, academic freedom, peaceful demonstration, and association with like-minded others. One must add freedom of the internet and digital freedom, given the vast technological advances of our day. These freedoms are not only provided for government praise singers who applaud the strength of power holders in public office, but also to those of us who criticize the violations, vices, violence, and excesses of those in power. However, increasingly in autocratic militant national contexts, repression ushers in muzzling, constriction, penalization, criminalization, and ultimate censure of criticism. All avenues of critical voices, be they from academia, from civil society, journalists, opposition political parties, cultural leaders, religious clerics, diplomats, or other specialized professionals, are increasingly shut down. Intimidation and censure are effected through repressive laws created by a compromised, corrupt legislature and unjust penalties slapped onto critics by a captive judiciary beholden to the autocratic executive. A regime of penalties is introduced and entrenched as the hallmark of dying democracies. These include denial of accreditation for journalists, deregistration of press houses or civil society organizations that are critical, trumped-up charges, violent arrests, detention without trial, torture during interrogation, sentencing as political prisoners of conscience, raids of office and residential premises, deportation of foreign correspondents, denial of visas, hate mail, death threats, and even death. Dictatorships invest heavily in stifling critical voices. Criticism is criminalized. Criticizing corrupt dictatorship can be courting death, or indeed, as my brief biography highlighted above, it can be a sentence to imprisonment in maximum security prison. However, rather than cower away from resisting the autocratic excesses and exposing failures of dictatorship, It is important, it is imperative that revolutionaries, radicals, and dissidents continue to creatively innovate new and fresh modes of criticizing those who abuse power. While creative criticism is welcome in democratic societies whose leaders welcome honest review of their positive and negative performance because of its ability to point to ways of future improvement, all sorts of critical feedback are beaten down in dictatorships. Despots take offense from honest criticism. Increasingly in Uganda, my country, critical creative voices in the arts, including poets, novelists, dramatists, graphic illustrators, comedians, and drama actors, are arrested and charged with producing and circulating offensive communication against President Museveni. The fear of giving offense to powerful, brutal holders of state power and the associated reprisals unleashed onto critical writers paralyze and hinder many from freely expressing their dissent. Creative critiques must resist the fear to offend. This defense of writing to power, truth that offends, recalls the powerful assertion by Salman Rushdie. What is freedom of expression, he asked. Without freedom to offend, it ceases to exist. Thus, it is important that in our defense of free speech and free expression, we defend even the freedom to offend. Given the potential dangers arising from free expression that criticizes despots who abuse power, what then is the role of the poet's voice in effectively building political agency? One of my commitments these days is to awaken, recruit, grow, and empower dissidents in the collective of poets living in repressive dictatorships, starting with Uganda, my home country. It is important to conscientize younger poets about effectively utilizing their privilege, skills, platforms, performance, and poetic productions to redistribute power away from those that serve dictatorships and back to the masses of poor, oppressed citizens. I am reigniting flames of revolution and breathing hopes of liberation into younger poets, spoken word artists, rappers, Luga flow rhymers, and other poetic wordsmiths in my locality. I am radicalizing poets to deploy their poetry for the struggle for freedom, justice, equality, liberation, and democracy. One of the first essential criteria for poets to use their voices for political agency is for them to consciously, purposefully, and deliberately make the choice to write as dissidents opposed to all forms of repression, suppression, and oppression. Whether living freely at home, behind prison bars as a political prisoner of conscience, or even in exile, where one fled from political persecution, a dissident poet, a revolutionary writer must continue writing critically against the injustices, lawlessness, and violations of the day. Abenabusia, Nawal El-Sadawi, James Paul Rubadiri, Ngugi wa Thiong'o, Wole Soyinka are 5 of many revolutionary African writers well known to exile and or prison. They all wrote in exile and in prison. Poetry, in conclusion, is a potent yet non-violent creative avenue for agentically offering voice, articulation, amplification, expression, naming, solidarity, and resistance against hateful autocratic militant abusers of power who corrode and erode the virtues of human dignity. In some contemporary dictatorships, established traditional strategies of resistance and peaceful protest are now inadequate. Former well-known tactics of resistance are paralyzed and rendered ineffective using preventive laws that bar public gatherings in the name of public health, public safety, public order, public morality, and national security. Dissidence through civil action is becoming increasingly expensive. For example, lives are lost, bodies are wounded or maimed by bullets, protesters are violently arrested and detained for months before their presentation in court, and heavy monetary fines are charged. When marches, picket lines, rallies, demonstrations, sit-down strikes, walkouts, boycotts, and other physical forms of protest are endangered or prohibited by the suppressive regimes in power, words of poetry can become the only viable form of stoically mounting, circulating, and sustaining resistance to militant, repressive brutes in power. Poetry thus facilitates political agency to individual wordsmiths to work either for or against the status quo. Poetic license offers a range of literary tools to speak truth to power. including cynicism, sarcasm, irony, satire, mockery, ridicule, personification, objectification, tragedy, comedy, parody, exaggeration, reversal, paradox, contradiction, and so on. Muting democracy indeed necessitates rendering more power to the poets. Happy 25 years of Poetry Africa. Happy silver anniversary. I thank you all.
It is with the inspiration from the wisdom of the likes of Stella Nyanzi that the 25th edition of the Poetry Africa Festival courageously look forward to the next 25 years. It is with the power of Stella Nyanzi's words that I continue on my journey of exploration of Phansi Museum with my tour guide, Sis Gloria. As we recall some of the exciting Poetry Africa workshops that were held for school students between these walls during the pre-COVID-19 days.
I think it's always nice to see youngsters and scholars from KZN, from around Durban, coming in and experiencing the Phansi Museum. And they've always come also in the African Arts Center, and they're supportive. And we've held some workshops here in the African Arts Center as well.
Yeah, it's lovely to have the students here, and particularly with the workshops, it shows them that there is so many different skills out there that they can learn with their hands, even if they don't want to make money out of it. It's just amazing to be within the art genre. But we do love having the children in here and attending the actual poetry workshops.
Welcome to the Phansi.
Hi, my name is Paul Mikula, and I've, for the last 60 years, I've been collecting the wonderful art of Southern Africa. Not the art that's in the galleries, but the art that's out there amongst the people, still being made today, changing every day as environments and materials change, and yet so exquisite that somehow one needs to celebrate it. In order to show this whole collection, about 20 years ago we decided to display it in a museum. Think of all art as a liberation. Phansi, in its displays of Ubuntu art, right throughout the art of healing, and its seed bank of identity. Phansi Museum has many outreach projects, besides what it does here, which is our schools project, where we invite all these schools to come and see us. We have our poster project, the annual calendar that goes to 4,000 schools all the way around the country. We have our various workshops that are run in order to keep old trades going and old skills going. We have our own publishing wing. We have a library and a very nice resource center up there that we try to share with other schools. We're trying to build up our academy to act as a kind of resource to all the schools that are around here. This is the place where they come to show respect to their own roots, where they rediscover their roots, and where every other visitor who comes there admires the roots that they find here. Our puppets are very famous around the world now. They've been to America, they've been all over the place. We want to begin to run the academy on a full-time basis so we can offer different courses, and then people will come for summer schools to learn more at our institution. We're a privately owned museum. We're a trust, and we want to invite you to come into that trust, to become partners of it, because we don't want to be owned by governments or politicians. We want to be owned by partners, and maybe our organization can be the beginning of an Ubuntu of 2,000 people in the world who all contribute 100 Rand a month for the next few years as we go along and build up this new community of trust.
Sengimemezela ukuthi iPoetry Africa Festival yeminyaka engama-25 isivuliwe. Ngiyanimema ukuba nivakashele iPhansi Museum eThekwini. iPhansi Museum ingenye yabalingani bePoetry Africa esiziqhenyayo ngabo. NginguSiphindile Hlongwa, i-curator yePoetry Africa Festival. Ngiyaziqhenya ngokuthi kule ndawo enhle kangaka iPhansi Museum singasho ngezwi simemeze sithi unmute, power to the poets.